Click. We shall snap our fingers next to the microphone in 3, 2, 1.
On the Shoulders of Dwarves, a weekly podcast about role-playing games. Hello and welcome to episode 43 of On the Shoulders of Dwarves, a weekly podcast about role-playing games and the gamers who game them. My name is Eran Aviram.
And my name is Uri Lifshitz. Hello.
And today we're going to have a class close-up on the Cleric. One of the four classic classes, Cleric, the fighter, the mage, and the rogue, which I think to this day...
Along the elf, dwarf, and halflings, which were classes at the time.
Yeah, but I'm saying even beyond that, I think that essentially you can probably distill every sort of archetype into one of these. And basically everything else, all of the other classes in D&D 5, all of the other concepts in basically any other fantasy game, can probably be distilled into these basic four. And I think that out of these four, the Cleric is probably the most interesting, although you might say otherwise. It doesn't matter. For this episode, it's the most interesting class.
One might say, for this episode, it is the only class.
Let's talk about what is a Cleric and why it is, at least for me, the most fun character to play in any game. First, I think that a Cleric has basically three aspects that define what makes them a Cleric and not like, say, a wizard that can heal or someone with spells. What's a Cleric? First, a Cleric has a role in society as the conduit between the mortal and the divine. And by that I mean that most of the time, Clerics will be part of a church, of an organization. You can have a lone fighter, you can have a lone rogue. It's pretty rare to see a lone Cleric. Also, Clerics have an expected role in every culture. They are the people that perform ceremonies from the gods for the people. And finally, by the way, D&D 5 established this by providing a spell called Ceremony that allows you to do basic ceremonial stuff that every holy person, in any society on earth is supposed to do, like marriage and pronounce death and stuff like that. It took D&D a lot of time to get to this, and I think it's because the social aspect of a Cleric is the one least used in role-playing games. It's the one that is usually reserved for NPCs, and Cleric players are not expected to behave like you would see, I don't know, a rabbi or a priest or someone from our world that has responsibilities just from being what they are.
It is true that usually pretty much everything you said is reserved to either NPCs or for the downtime section of every adventure. But it's interesting that even though Clerics have a role in society and an expected place in it, it's funny how it's also very easy to believe that a Cleric would be outside of that expected location. Clerics go on quests provided by their gods. Clerics have duties to perform for the church. Clerics go on pilgrimage. Clerics go on a missionary expedition in order to convert the heathen, etc. So there's a lot of functions which a Cleric might perform outside of civilization, which is, I think, a very good leeway to playing one.
The second aspect that I see in being Cleric is your personal connection to the divine. Unlike, again, a rogue, which might have a personal connection to the guild leader, or the wizard, who might have a personal connection to his mentor, or whatever, you can't be a Cleric without having a personal connection to the divine. It's simply impossible. This is what you are. This is what defines you in a way. What is this personal connection? What sort of drama might be there? It's that's your own thing. That depends on your god. That depends on your cleric. It depends on if you even want to explore this connection in your role play. Personally, this is the thing that I enjoy most about being a cleric. Being a person who is mortal, who is a person with urges and desires and whatever, and also having to represent something that is perfect, or at least very strict, very final. When a god says something, when a god wants something, when a god commands, this is a thing that must happen. And I don't mean like he suddenly commands go to that mountain. It also be like every 7 days you must rest for a day. Okay, but currently we are in the middle of an adventure that I feel obliged to be on for other reasons. Maybe because of personal reasons, maybe because of godly reasons, because I think it's really important for the church, etc. And I can't rest now. What am I going to do with this conflict? How am I going to resolve it for myself? I really like this. Finally, the third aspect is your expected role in the party. And that's way more mechanical and way more metagaming than the other two. This has very little to do with what is happening in the fiction. A cleric, generally speaking, is expected to heal and buff. But we'll talk about it more later. But for now, I want to say that I really enjoy support characters. I play support characters basically in every multiplayer game online.
Yeah, same here. I think it's one of our, defining traits that we like to help other people. Probably that's why we're recording this podcast.
Completely true. However, I also very much enjoy finding ways to play a cleric that go way into another direction. Things like, a cleric of storms, a cleric of fire, I don't know, a cleric of something that is very fierce, maybe, and find ways to be supportive while still being very, very active. So what's fun about playing a cleric? I've touched about it before, but I want to be very clear because I see two things that are the things that bring me to play a cleric, the things that make me choose this class over others. First, a cleric is probably somewhere on a personal journey that brought them to where they are. This is something that I can't say about other classes. Maybe paladins. Paladins, of course, are very close to clerics, but we'll touch on paladins, I think, sometime on a different episode, because there are so many other things to say about them, and I think that what defines a paladin is duty, while what defines a cleric is that connection with the divine. So a cleric has some connection with the divine, and as I said, are probably on some sort of a personal journey. And why do I think that? Because usually you are not born with a connection to the divine. Sometime during your lifetime, I don't know, you decide that this is a thing that calls to you. Maybe you hear a calling. Maybe people around you in your society urge you to go and become this cleric because you are very wise, you are very clever, you seem to be very moral, and it is expected of people like you to become clerics. Maybe one day you have this realization, and after being a horrible person for all of your life, you suddenly think, I want to become good. The way to become good is to become a cleric. I don't know. There could be many reasons for you to choose to become a cleric. But maybe it's old news, and you being a cleric is not the main point in the story. I still think you are on a journey. Because, as I said before, there is this eternal conflict, or maybe friction, between you and your god, and what the god wants out of you, what the god demands of you. And there will come a point where this friction becomes too hot to handle. This is in the future, probably, of your journey. You probably haven't played it yet when you just start a character. Or maybe you play a character that from first level is hesitant about his role in the world, and you're not sure if you want to stay a cleric. And maybe you still get your powers and you ask yourself why. And maybe you still behave, but you perform the rituals and you say the words, but you don't really believe them anymore. And maybe you are afraid that you are losing something from yourself. Or maybe you think that you were cursed. Or maybe you just think that there is something else that interests you now. I don't know. There are so many things that can happen to you as a cleric just because there are some things that are expected from you as a cleric. And the second thing that I really, really like about playing a cleric is the precepts, the demands, the specific demands. Mm-hmm. Because when you play, like, for example, a cleric of Abadar, okay, the god of commerce and locks and security, you see the world through specific god-colored glasses, Abadar-colored glasses. Everything relates to commerce in some way. Every conversation is a negotiation. When you look at a keep, you look at it as a secured place, not as the place where the king resides, or royal location, or maybe even a holy location. You look at the gates, not at what's inside. I like it because it forces upon me as a player an interesting point of view that I sort of have to use because that's what I committed to when I said I want to be a cleric of Abadar. And I really like how it clashes with the world, because the world does not completely comply to Abadar's precepts. And when it is said that I must always keep everything secure and then people still steal from me because that happens, because that's the world, what do I do? How do I now behave? How do I choose to interpret the things that happened to me using the precepts that I have to obey? I like it. I find it's really fun for me.
I think it's one of those cases in which a fictitious world is a lot easier to deal with than in our real world, because in the game world, Abadar really exists. Yes. And you can go to a higher cleric and they will commune with the god and he will tell you why that happened, or possibly give you a quest to resolve that. So it's a lot easier in my mind, since the existence of God is not a question of fate. The gods exist.
I completely agree.
And I love the fact that simply because you have a cleric in your party, it requires some sort of an ingrained definition of the setting. For example, you have a cleric. That cleric has a religion. Do they have a church? Is that church active? Is this a common religion? Is this a banned religion? Is this religion persecuted? How many believers does this church have? When that cleric goes somewhere, does he meet hostility? Does he meet a lot of welcoming? What are the fringe benefits of playing a cleric in this setting? And I find that amazing, because there's not a lot of player characters where simply the choice of class defines a lot of the worlds around it. You have to make those decisions immediately, because otherwise, the guy playing the cleric is in for a nasty surprise, or a good surprise, but that's possibly not what they signed up for. And in my head, I always have Dragonlance for those who remember that, because we're talking about a world where the gods has left the world. There's no healing magic whatsoever. Divine magic is non-existing. And then suddenly you have a cleric who's met with, a range of emotion, starting from very hesitant belief.
Yeah, and utter disbelief. Yeah.
And as a result, is either being ignored or very actively persecuted. So I think just the very fact that you're saying, I will play a cleric, now this gaming world has a lot more to offer me, because clerics are ingrained in the world in some way.
Yes, I completely agree.
Which brings me to my next single word point. Heretics. Who are the heretics? Why are they considered heretics? Is that an active something? Are you as a cleric expected to fight off the heretic? I love the fact that as a GM, if one of the players is playing a cleric, that's like, hey dude, why don't you just, take any plot hook you want and I'm going to be your hook for that, okay? There's this really, really far away dungeon you want us to explore, fine, just send me a note from the cardinal and I'm on my way. Or give me a divine message from the Almighty and I'm on my way. Or simply say, wow, there's some rumors about some super duper heretics over there and I'm on my way. It's one of those really easily influence classes, because by definition, they answer to a higher power, and that higher power is usually played by the GM. So it's easy.
We used to have in our party, in the Purple Orange, way back, a character who was a cleric. Well, she was an invoker in D&D 4, but that's basically a different type of cleric. It's just a very assault type cleric. And she was the heretic. She was the one that went against the church teaching and against the people higher up in the church that told her to do specific things and not to do specific things. And she believed that what she's doing is very important. She was an avid believer in her god, the Silver Flame, and she knew that something is corrupt in the church. She was sure of that. And so most of her arc, of her personal arc, was about this conflict between her and the church about the true belief. It was awesome.
Again, like I said, heretics. If you look around the church and you don't see anyone who is a heretic, you're probably it.
Yeah.
Now, I would suggest if you have a cleric in your party, or you are the cleric in the party, or you're GMing for a cleric in the party, I would invite you to go and brush up on your history. Because our history is inspiring in the way religions have shaped cultures and destroyed them. If you want to understand what's it like to be a persecuted religion, I urge you to go and study the early days of Christianity, because it's, how do I put this? A relatively new religion, just 2,000 years old, and we have a lot of text from that time, from both sides. Also, you can study the Old Testament to be inspired by what it was like to receive the Word of God in a very real sense for those people. And if you want to go further, you can study the way the Romans treated conquered nations to understand the day-to-day life of a non-monotheistic society. And I'm saying day-to-day life because I think that's something that if you focus on, it's a lot more inspiring for the game than the big stuff. We all can imagine that, once a year, the great ceremony of whatever, when we sacrifice a goat to the sun and blah, blah, blah. But what about the day-to-day life? What about, the weekly Sunday Mass? What about for Jewish people, the weekly Sabbath, the day of rest? What about the simple act of, okay, I'm going to travel now for 40 miles, which is a lot. So I'm going to stop at the temple of the god of travels and ask them to keep an eye on me during that time. But I'm also traveling in order to do a business transaction. So once I finish in the temple of the god of travels, I'm going to pop by for a moment for the temple of the god of deals and trades and ask him if he could, spot me a good one to do my business. And possibly, if I want to cover all angles just to be on the safe side, I'm going to stop for a moment at the small temple of the god of weather and just make sure I don't get caught in the rain during my trip.
That last one is really important because there are a lot of gods that you are trying to appease. There are gods that represent mostly bad things that happen, and you go to them and you say, please don't happen. And that was very common in ancient Mesopotamia. We did an episode in our Hebrew edition about ancient Mesopotamia, and the gods there are insane.
Yeah, we should definitely invite our historical expert to talk about more ancient cultures. It's amazing how much the simple act of studying and brushing up on ancient civilization can enrich your game tenfold, especially in the religious aspects.
Also, current civilizations, like the concept of a temple maiden in Japan is pretty interesting. Everything that resolves around it, and again, the place in society, maybe not super relevant for an adventurer because a shrine maiden, temple maiden, stays at that shrine, so not very conductive for going on adventures, but it's a thing that might help you in creating your own religion and making some interesting choices about what sort of roles people fulfill in the church, in your church, because there's not a cleric. There's actually a lot of different roles that you can be in the church.
Right. Now, apart from the simple hierarchy in which usually denotes the amount of the flock you shepherd, so to speak, there's also a lot of different roles you perform in a church. Makes sense. Now, before we move on to mechanics, I just want to throw a quick idea to the head of everyone who's listening. Clerics are not necessarily emissaries of the gods. Now, I know that if I'll say, well, druids get their spells from nature, ha ha ha, or magicians get their spells from a myriad of other sources, you'll say, yeah, but these are druids and these are magicians, that there's a reason why these are not called clerics. I would argue that clerics can similarly be gaining their access to magic from other sources. Now, I ran a game many years ago where I wanted an adversary for the current religion of the kingdom, and I chosen a demon which came from hell, and I said, okay, this demon have the ability to grant spells to his followers, thus turning his followers into de facto clerics. Why not? There's also, like I said, a host of other sources as well. Simply open your mind to the possibilities. Buddhist cleric may get their magic from the great balance of whatever. Jedis, which we usually think of as some sort of paladin/warriors. What if a Jedi would say, I don't want to fight, I want to just deepen my understanding of the Force and do Force stuff all the time, and maybe write a bunch of books and then use those books to teach other Jedi Knights how to do more cool Force stuff.
That's totally canon, by the way. There are people in the movies, like I think probably Yoda, that can fight but are not Jedi Knights necessarily. And in the Star Wars role-playing game, there are several classes. They're not exactly classes, but sort of classes of Jedi. And only like 2 of them are fighty-fighty. And among the others, you can find like the diplomat, but you can also find the cleric, the one that specializes in understanding the Force and conveying its will and, prophesizing and healing and everything that we would say a cleric would do. The connection with the divine.
Indeed. Now you've mentioned Star Wars role-playing games. I'm just going to open a tiny subsection here and say that when we say Star Wars role-playing game, we mean the Star Wars role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games from 2012,
sure.
Which is amazing. We both agree on that. But just for your knowledge, there was one from 87 who was mainly just rolling a bunch of D6s around. And there was also a pretty cool one, Star Wars role-playing game by Wizard of the Coast, who came out in the year 2000 and was a very interesting adaptation of the D20 system, which has been revised in 2002 and then completely remodeled at 2007. And I'm just going to say that I think the best thing that happened to that system was that the Fantasy Flight game created a brand new one, which is much better.
Okay.
But having said all that, why don't we go and talk a little bit more about the mechanics of clerics from way back until today. Now, clerics traditionally are the healers of the party. They're the one who mend the wounds, use divine magic to heal the party, etc. And I remember a time when this was the main reason why you did not want to play a cleric. I think the term we've used in the past was a heal bot, because all the cleric did was move around from one wounded character to another and apply healing. And that's not a lot of fun. It doesn't give you a lot of leeway to do whatever it is you as a player want to do with your character. And there's been a lot of attempts to mend this. I remember D&D 4th edition tried to make the healing part of the cleric's regular actions. You hit an opponent, and thus, because you're doing the right thing, your god of choice give you the ability to heal someone else. Or better yet, the healing magic of the cleric, the what you would do in the day-to-day, the round-by-round fights, was a minor action. So you could walk up to someone, do whatever it is, the cool action you wanted to do, and offhandedly also heal, giving you a lot more control. And D&D 5th edition continue this train of thought. The healing word spell is a bonus action in the same manner as they did in 4th edition, and for the same reasons. As someone who's playing a cleric, you don't want to be tied down to the role of the healer and have that be the sole thing you can do in the game. It gets old.
I think that the 4th and 5th edition also did a lot to help, again, push us away from this mindset by having two distinct editions. First, everyone can heal themselves. Between combats, everyone can just spend hit dice and just heal themselves. So if you can just survive this fight, and most characters will survive every fight, you occasionally need healing during fights, but again, you can use healing word, etc., and just push some hit points where it counts. And there are, of course, some other classes that can heal you during fights as well. Bards can really be helpful with that. And the second point is giving clerics a wider range of abilities, way more than just I'm the healer. And when you say cleric these days, at least personally, I no longer think of a healbot, because you actually haven't told me enough by saying I'm playing a cleric. A cleric of what? A cleric of who? Because it really does matter. In D&D 5, in Pathfinder, of course. In Dungeon World, obviously. It really matters what sort of divine power you are serving, because you will gain completely different powers. You will want to choose completely different spells, and your healing abilities might be, you will have some healing, but again, on the down low. Thankfully, you won't be needing to heal everyone because we can heal ourselves, etc., etc. So there's a lot of smart game design these days that allow you to play an awesome cleric of your choosing. So much so that in, for example, Critical Role, the actual play, I'm not sure if I actually need to explain what it is. Critical Role is so big, just go and search for it if you don't know. They have 2 clerics in the party. Because why not? They are so different from each other. One of them is the cleric of stealth, and she serves the traveler, who is this trickster god that no one knows about. She's like basically the only cleric of him. And the other one is a cleric of, we're not really sure. I mean, he's really wise and calm, and it doesn't really matter what specific force he serves, but he's obviously into nature and healing and all of that stuff. And they can't be more different from each other.
Also, I think one of the things that really pushed to create a difference between clerics was, I think, 3rd edition added the concept of domain.
Exactly.
So now if we're both clerics of the same god, we might still be servants of different aspects of that god. For example, if we're both worshippers of Loki, I can be more focused on the trickster side, while you can be more focused on the evil side, or on the...
Maybe vengeance. Maybe it's something that reflects Loki in this world. Maybe he's way into vengeance.
I also love the fact that once you take a god and you give him several domains, I felt it makes a lot of the god less one-dimensional, shall we say?
Yes.
Because literally you can see the different aspect, the different sides of that specific god.
Which is why I no longer use stuff like the god of thunder, because that's a very specific thing. Let's say the god of thunder and rage and storms, maybe in general, and all sorts of storm, like maybe
emotional storm,
or stuff like that, and think about at least 3 different aspects for this god. So they can have 3 different types of clerics that serve at least, for example.
At least. Which is very interesting. It's also great to think about evil gods and to make them not banal, shall we say.
Yes. For example, Asmodeus from Golarion. Do tell us about him.
Well, Asmodeus from Golarion is a devil god. He's really, really evil, but he's also very lawful. He's the god of deals and contracts. From his point of view, he is very much in the right. My character, which, you know what, I'm going to mention it in detail later on, but Asmodeus, from his followers' point of view, is not evil. He's a necessity. He's what making things happen because he forces people who agree on something to uphold their word. And that's something, pretty much everyone can relate to. You make a deal with someone and then they go back on their word and you're saying, oh my God, if only there was someone who would punish them for breaking their word. And guess what? There is.
And you can worship that aspect of him, the one of punishment, but you can also worship the aspect of him of keeping the law and being orderly. And, I don't want to say tyrannical, but answering to people above you and the power of hierarchy and stuff like that. And you might be a very nice person who worship him through these aspects by, just forgetting about the rest.
Well, my current character is a follower of both Asmodeus and Abadar. And that might seem like a huge contradiction, but if you'll stick around for taking the load off, I'll be happy to explain how that works.
And now it's time to take the load off.
Well, like I promised before during the episode, my current character, Krieger van Messer, he's a swashbuckler from the faraway land of Cheliax, where pretty much everyone worship Asmodeus. It's a very, very strict society in which people keep their words because that's the word of God. God say, keep your word. You do a contract, that contract is binding, like with devils. And during our adventures, we're playing Pathfinder Curse of the Crimson Throne, and in our party we have a paladin. She is a very strict follower of Abadar, the god of commerce and protection. This is a god whose most of his temples are actually more like heavily fortified banks, because you know that this is a place that will honor trade and commerce, and also will be really, really good at protecting what's in it, because that's what their god does. And upon hearing more and more about this god, Krieger, my character, decided, wow, this is something I really connect with. Because both Asmodeus and Abadar are basically all about keeping your word and to allow a free exchange of contracts which are completely binding. And when I say binding, I mean in the holy sense of the word. When you swear an oath and place your hand on the Bible of Asmodeus or Abadar, that shit's gonna stick. So it's really awkward because he has, a totally black armor with blood red sigil of skulls and death and whatever, because that's how people dress when they worship Asmodeus. But he also has a white ribbon across his chest with the silver emblem of the peaceful god of Abadar. And the reason it works because Krieger knows that if he gives his word to someone, he's gonna uphold it. And if he makes an exchange, some sort of deal, both Asmodeus and Abadar gonna make sure that that deal gonna be kept. The trick was to find a domain or an aspect in which the wills of Abadar and Asmodeus align perfectly together.
And I like it because, as you said, your character is not a cleric, but
No.
You are still using a lot of the power of the divine that we've talked about here to create interesting conflicts and desires and stories for your character. And it's awesome. And of course, it's totally possible. And I do recommend players to try it out, especially if your world has interesting divine powers. I, unfortunately, don't have interesting divine powers, and also I haven't played. So instead, I'll talk a bit more about the Crystal Heart starter set, which is now available through DriveThruRPG as well, and through up24players.com/crystalheart. And we are going for a Kickstarter in about a month, and I hope you'll like it. I'll try out the starter set and see if you like it. I think it's pretty awesome. We're going to have all sorts of appearances on podcasts and stuff. Uri will give links in the future so people will know where to listen to me. I mean, if you want to listen to hear me in other places that are not here, or you can just put this episode on repeat and listen to my words again and again. Finally, I want to give a specific recommendation on something that is already on DriveThruRPG: bards that don't sing. It's one of my 3 suggestions document that I uploaded like a year back or something, and it resonated with this episode. So I would recommend that you check it out if you want to pay for it, or if you are patrons of Up24Players, you can download it for free. It's 3 suggestions for bards who don't sing. It's taking one of the theoretically classical things that you have to say about bards, all the bards sing, and see how you can play a bard that uses different types of connection with the crowd, which is, I think, the main thing that defines a bard. And I think there might be some inspiration there for different types of clerics as well that differ from the classical healbot, etc. And that's about it. If you want to listen to more of us, go to dwarfcast.net. Also, check us out on the interwebs. We are at Dwarf Podcast on Twitter and on Facebook. And if you want to listen to us say goodbye, you can do so in just a moment. Later! On the Shoulder of Dwarves is shared under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial 4. The intro and outro are taken from Silly Fun by Kevin MacLeod. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3. Find us at dwarfcast.net and follow us on Twitter or Facebook.